All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you happen to be. My name is Christopher Harrison, and this is recorded. So unfortunately, there's a couple of things that have come up recently in my family, and sadly, I'm not available on Thursday morning my time to chat with all of you wonderful people. And that made me really sad because this is actually two of my favorite topics. I love TypeScript. I love chatbots that I think when executed correctly, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward here, that chatbots can be really wonderful and allow your users some nice ways to be able to connect and interact. But again, unfortunately, I'm not available. However, I want to offer up this recording here of me going through and covering all of the same topics I would have talked about live. So hopefully you'll enjoy this. And I do want to also highlight the fact that I do have a couple of esteemed colleagues out in the chat window who can also answer whatever questions, comments, or otherwise that you might have. So please go ahead and engage with them, ask questions, and you can also find me on Twitter. There we go. Right about there, just like down below my finger, you can see my my Twitter handle there. You can go ahead and reach out and ask questions there. Okay. So with that, let's go ahead and start chatting a little bit about bots and TypeScript and everything else, because again, this is what I want to talk about today. So you'll notice now right down below me is the Code and Coffee TypeScript and bot framework and our basic goals here. So our basic goals is we want to chat a little bit about the technology. There's going to be two of them. That's going to be bot framework and TypeScript. Then we want to take a look at the tooling that we're going to need, set up the template, set up an Echo bot, go ahead and add some services, and then eventually deploy this out into Azure. So that's going to be the overall flow here. So let's start by talking about chatbots. One thing that you may notice about the way that I talk about chatbots is I really try to steer clear of the word bot. And the reason that I try to steer clear of the word bot is because the word bot is relatively overloaded. That when you think of bots, when you think of robots, you're thinking about Rosie from the Jetsons for anybody who might get that reference, or you're thinking about things where there's a lot of AI and ML involved, and maybe a lot of automation and a lot of things that it's able to do all on its own. And that's not to say that a chatbot can't do all of those things, but there's actually nothing inherently special about a chatbot that would actually allow it to do any of those things. So let's define some terms here before we go any further, so that way we understand the tech that we're trying to build upon here. So what we're going to be creating today is we're going to be creating a chatbot. So let me define the word chatbot. A chatbot is simply an app. That's it. It's just an app. Now, it's an app with a different interface. It's an app with a different user experience. It's an app with a different set of tools. It's an app that is going to require some different programming paradigms. So when I say the word simple and I say the word just here, I'm not oversimplifying what it might take to create a chatbot or what it might take to create a successful chatbot. But what I am trying to highlight is the fact that at the end of it all that a chatbot is it's simply an app with a different interface. That interface is going to be where the user will be able to send messages and get replies back. And those messages and those replies can actually take a lot of different forms. Can they be all text? Sure, absolutely. But they could also be buttons, they could also be videos, they could also be images, it could also have speech, etc. But again, none of those are required. There's nothing inherent, again, about a chatbot that makes it overly special with regards to AI or ML. And in fact, if we take a look at the bot framework here, and I scroll on down, what you're going to notice, there's a little design spot here. And if I click on design guidelines, you're going to notice that there's a really nice call out right here. Factors that do not guarantee a bot success: how smart the bot is, natural language, and voice. Those types of things that we would often think about when we hear the word bot and we automatically connect it to AI or ML really don't actually guarantee a bot success. Okay, well then what does then influence a bot success? Or better yet, let's ask this question of where is it that we should use a bot? So where bots shine is when we are creating an application where what we want to do is allow the user to either A, dive straight to whatever it is they might be looking for. So for example, let's say that I want to allow somebody to like change a password or to set up two-factor authentication or something like that. Like those types of things which are extremely important, but are oftentimes hidden somewhere inside of a UX. Now, don't get me wrong, let me be clear about something. Just because I said the word password there, I am not in any way, shape, or form saying that you should have your user ever type a password into a bot. Don't do that. But your user could say to a bot, hey, I need to change my password. And then your bot could go ahead and provide a link to the change password screen, or maybe to the doc that talks about that. Bots are also great because they can allow your users to maybe describe what it is that they're looking for. So it can be really nice to be able to search through a collection of data and things like that. But the other great factor about a bot, the other great advantage to a bot, is that it does allow your users to be met where they're at. So with a bot, and especially with bot framework, what's going to happen is that we're going to be able to take this bot and publish this out to a lot of different locations. So we can take this exact same bot and we could publish this out into, we could take this chatbot, should try to get myself back into that habit again of saying chatbot, but I'll probably digress and say bot periodically, but anyway, that's all right. But what we can do is we can take this and we can publish this out into Facebook Messenger, or out into Line, or Microsoft Teams, or Slack, or Twilio, or a lot of other different locations. And so now my user can go ahead and interact with it without having to go to a different page. And one of the best examples of this that I could give would be like a Facebook page. That if you think about a Facebook page for a lot of different corporations, it's really nothing more than just a static blog. I mean, yeah, sure, they're going to be updating different posts and highlighting specials and sales and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's a one-way bit of communication, that the page is going to put information out, and there's not necessarily going to be a great way for the user to communicate back unless you've got a dedicated staff. So one thing that I could do is I could create a chatbot. I could then go ahead and publish this chatbot out into Facebook, and now that becomes part of my page. So now when my user messages the page, they're now going to go ahead and message the chatbot. But I also want to highlight one additional thing, which is the fact that I can also use the chatbot to do a little bit of routing. So maybe if I'm setting this up for some form of, say, tech support or otherwise, that we could go ahead and route messages out to other services or out to a human to be able to answer maybe more difficult questions that we haven't necessarily programmed for. So that's what chatbots are all about. And I also do want to highlight the fact that I'm going to be using TypeScript. Now, TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript, and it allows us to overcome some of the challenges that arise with JavaScript. If you take a look at my past presentation, you can go ahead and see that in the chat window there, or ask for the link. They'll go ahead and provide that. You can find out a lot more about TypeScript. But the big thing that I want to highlight right now is the fact that this is going to compile down into plain JavaScript. I also want to highlight the fact that if you're already familiar with JavaScript, making the transition into TypeScript can feel natural because a lot of the syntax is going to be the same. TypeScript, superset of JavaScript. TypeScript shares about 70% of the syntax of JavaScript. So it does feel a little bit like JavaScript, that there are going to be a lot of things that will feel very natural to you as a JavaScript developer. I am going to say that if you're already familiar with, say, Java, or if you're already familiar with C#, that making this transition will become a little bit smoother even still. But if you do know JavaScript, again, you are going to notice there's a lot of the same syntax. And we'll see TypeScript and so forth as we move along here. Okay. Now, what I want to do with our little setup here, with our little example, is I want to go in and see how we can go ahead and update my little run of show over there. Highlight where we are and what it is that we're doing. And what I want to do is I want to set up the tooling for our bot. I want to set up the template, and then I want to go ahead and start playing around and see what we can do with this. So if I come over to the bot framework page here, you're going to notice that if I scroll all the way on down, I can see the life cycle here, and I can also see, clicking on tutorials here, a whole set of different tutorials that will walk me through everything that I might need here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on JavaScript. And if I hit JavaScript, you're going to notice that it highlights a few different prereqs here. The first prereq, need Visual Studio Code. Of course I need Visual Studio Code. Well, hold on. I shouldn't say of course I need Visual Studio Code. What I really need is a code editor, but I love Visual Studio Code. I highly recommend Visual Studio Code, and I'm not saying that simply because of who it is that I work for. I'm saying it because this is the tool that I really do love to use. I love Visual Studio Code. So that's the tool that I'm going to use. We'll need Node.js, which I already have installed. And we're also going to need a little thing called Yeoman. And if you're not familiar with Yeoman, Yeoman is a scaffolding tool that what this will do is it will automatically set up a folder structure and set up various files and so forth that are already like partially baked. And it's there to help make our lives a little bit easier as developers. That if we think about kind of what it is that we do on a day-to-day basis as developers, a lot of it winds up being relatively repetitive. We're doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's redundant. It's circular. We are repeating ourselves. We're stuck in an endless loop. Okay, I think I've beat that joke into the ground here. But we want to try and avoid that. And so this is where Yeoman comes into play, is Yeoman does give us the opportunity to avoid all of that. That with Yeoman, we can simply say yo and then whatever the name of the generator is, and then have it automatically set up a lot of that initial structure. So that way we can then get up and running a little bit faster and just start doing whatever it is that we might want to do. Cool. And so we'll take a look at how to install that here in just a second. It's actually just going to be an npm package. We do need Git, and that's going to be required for Yeoman, which we'll take a look at in a minute here. And then we also need this little thing called the Bot Framework Emulator. And what the Bot Framework Emulator is going to do is it's going to be our client for the chatbot that we're going to be building. So that way, rather than us having to say fire up a tool that's going to allow us to make REST calls, like to start doing curl or whatever it is that you might be using to make those types of calls. Rather than firing that up manually and interacting that way, we can use this little emulator to be able to see what the user is going to experience when talking to our chatbot. So that's the framework emulator, and we will need to install that. I actually already have that installed, so I'm not going to worry about reinstalling it. The next little thing here is if you are using Windows, there is going to be one additional command that you'll need to run here about the Windows build tools, or at the very least run this to avoid some potential errors. That unfortunately, one of the tools that all of this uses does use a particular NPM package, which yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. There's some sort of a dependency here that works properly on Linux, doesn't work properly on Windows. And so you may need to go in and install that. Now, if you don't install it, all that's going to happen is you're just going to get an error message. I'm just going to get the error message and I'm just going to deal with it, and I'll highlight what that error message is, but it's not going to impact anything that we're going to be doing. Okay. So with that, let's go ahead and fire up my command line here. And I am going to use Windows for this. Typically, I actually do my development in Linux using WSL2, but there's a couple of additional things that need to happen with Bot Framework with WSL2, just because of how the integration between WSL2 and Windows winds up working, that I really don't necessarily want to get into. If you hit me up on Twitter, I can talk through all of that, but I just want to avoid that. So for simplicity's sake, I am going to be doing this in Windows. Now I'm going to pause for a coffee here. But I also want to again mention, if you're just tuning in, that this is recorded. Again, unfortunately, I did have another obligation, so not available on Thursday morning. However, I do have a couple of esteemed colleagues that are in the chat that are there to answer your questions. So please feel free to ask them questions, or again, you can always find me on Twitter as well. Okay, so what I've got here is I've got my my little command window, and I'm going to go ahead and install globally the Yeoman generator and then generator bot builder. Now that generator bot builder is going to be the tooling that will be able to set up the scaffolding for my chatbot, and then Yo again is going to be the Yeoman generator. So let me run that, and that will do an install, and that'll just take it a moment. Chugga, chugga, chugga. Cool. All right. So now I've got everything installed. So now what I get to do, and this is probably my favorite thing about the Yeoman generator, is I get to say yo, and then whatever it is that I want it to build. So I'm going to say yo bot builder. Love that. It's the little things in life that make me happy. Okay, so I'm going to run this, And now what this is going to do is it's going to run me through a little wizard here. So it's going to ask me, well, what's the name of my chatbot? And I'm just going to accept defaults here just to make it a little bit easier to run through. So my chatbot, fine, I'll just go ahead and grab that. So I'll just hit enter there. And then it's going to ask me what's my bot going to do. And I could go ahead and type in a different description. This is a sample bot, just like that. Hit enter. Now it's going to ask me the language that I want to use, and I'm going to use TypeScript here. Hit enter, and now it's going to ask me what type of bot I want to use. And so I'm actually going to grab this little URL here, and I'm going to open this up inside of my browser, and I want to highlight the different templates that are available, and so you can see which ones it is that you might choose. So if we're new to bot framework, which we are, we want minimal features, which we do. The Echo bot is exactly what it is that we're looking for. We do have a core bot, which actually does a lot of additional things that you could go in and start to take a look at. And then we also have our empty bot, which, sort of like the name implies, is going to be an empty bot. And then from there, I could go ahead and start to build. But in my case, I want to use the Echo bot, so I'll make sure that that's selected, hit enter, and shall we go ahead and create it? And I'm going to say yes. Now, what this is going to do is this is going to copy over a whole bunch of files for me, which we'll go in and take a look at. And then it's going to go ahead and do the install of everything for us. And it's going to give us a couple little warnings and errors and so forth. And none of that's going to impact what it is that we're doing. And then finally, you'll notice, sure enough, our new bot is ready. So if I change directories into my chatbot, I can see everything that it's been that has been created. But of course, it's always better to go see that inside of code. So I'm going to open up that folder inside of code. There we go. And now let's take a look at what we've got here. Now you are going to notice that I'm using the dark theme today. The last time I did a Code and Coffee, which was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I think, there was a lot of back and forth about using light theme and dark theme and so forth and so on. Today I'm going to go ahead and use dark theme just to make one half of my audience happy and the other half upset. The other reason is, honestly, this is how I usually do my development, and I just forgot to change over to light theme, so it's dark theme today. That's fine. Okay, let's take a look at a couple of the files here. So the first that we've got is this little readme.md file, and this is really just a bit of an overview of everything that our bot now has. You are going to notice that it highlights the prerequisites. You're going to notice that it gives us the little commands that we're going to need to run our bot and to actually start it. So one nice thing about, that wasn't what I wanted. One nice thing about the Yeoman generator is that it did already run npm install for us, and so now all we have to do is run npm start. Now, if you're not already familiar with npm, npm is the node package manager, and so install will go grab all of the requisite packages, and then in our case, start is going to start our bot. Now I'm going to show this off in just a second here, but if I open up my package.json file, you're going to see that there's a lot of pre-baked scripts that have been provided, one of which is start, which will go ahead and then run build, and then it will automatically start the index.js file inside of lib for us, and that will go ahead and run our bot. So what I'm going to do is, let me make sure, oops, yeah, I was afraid of that. Okay, my terminal window is just opening in the wrong place. Let me do this. This is going to be the easiest way for me to do this. Okay, let me go ahead and start my bot. So I'm just going to say npm start. Now the reason that I'm doing this is just because I want to highlight and show off the bot as it currently sits. Like before we get into code, I think it's going to be better if we just take a look at what our bot is currently doing, so that way we've got a little bit of an understanding of what all is going on here with our bot. Okay, now the window that we're going to want for this is going to be our little bot framework emulator, and give me 2 seconds here to set this up. I just need to go in and grab this. There we go. Sorry about this. I am doing this as we go here. So let me, oh, weird. Okay, well, I'm not gonna worry about it for right now. Okay, cool. All right, so in any event, here is my, here's my bot framework emulator. So this is a little utility that is designed to give us the ability to interact with a chatbot. And it's perfect for going in and just playing around and doing some basic user testing and things like that. And what's great about the emulator is it's going to give us the ability to simulate certain activities like typing and so forth, and then also be able to see everything that's going on behind the scenes with our bot. So I'm going to click on Open Bot, and it's going to ask me, okay, well, where is your bot? So my bot is currently not at HTTPS, localhost colon 3978 whack API whack messages. Now you might be wondering, well, Christopher, how in the world do you know where this bot is? And if I go back to the console window, what you're going to notice is it printed out on, well, it sort of printed out on the screen there that it says that Restify is listening, and then it tells me go get the bot framework emulator, and then to talk to your bot, select Open Bot. If we really actually go check out the docs here, if I go back to the README, it will now give me a little bit better information. So to connect to it, open the bot framework emulator, which we had done, file, open bot, and then enter in a URL of localhost 3978 API messages. Again, we're going to see the behind the scenes in a minute. This is just the URL. Okay, let me go back over here to my emulator, and I'm going to now click connect. So I've typed in that URL, I'm going to click connect. And so now what you're going to notice is here is my bot window. This right here is how I'm going to interact with my bot. You're going to notice over here on the right side that I can see everything that's going back and forth between my emulator and my chatbot. So what we're going to see, for example, is the fact that a message came in that said hello and welcome. And I can actually, if I click on message, I can see the full JSON of what it is that, that came in. I can also, if I want, go ahead and type out a brand new message. So I could say, hello there. And sure enough, my little bot is now going to echo out hello there. And so I could go in and see that little message, and I can see this little message. And so it gives me a really nice ability to be able to go back and forth and communicate out with my bot. And I can see everything that's taking place behind the scenes, see all of my error messages, and so forth and so on. So it's a really nice way for me to be able to test my bot and send messages back and forth and get a little bit of behind the scenes of what it is that that my bot is doing, which is wonderful. And if I want to just start from the beginning, then I can go ahead and start from the beginning. So there is a chatbot, and that's how our chatbots are going to interact with the user. But let's talk a bit about the code here. Okay, coffee. It's important. Okay. Let's start off with the core file in which all of our code is going to exist. And this is going to be inside of SRC, and this is going to be our index.ts file. This is our core TypeScript file. Now, TypeScript, again, is a superset of JavaScript. TypeScript is going to compile, transcompile, or transpile, as some of the cool kids call it, or at least I call it. Some other people call it that way. It's going to transpile into JavaScript. And it's going to be the JavaScript that runs. It's the JavaScript that executes. Let me say that one more time here. It's the JavaScript that executes. The reason that I keep saying that is because I really want to drive home this point that we don't need a special version of Node. We're just using Node. There's nothing that's special about it. Instead, what's going to happen when we write out our TypeScript is it's going to convert into JavaScript. If I open up this lib directory, and I'll talk about how this lib directory was created here in a minute, and I open up index.js, you're going to notice there's our JavaScript. Now, even though this is pre-recorded, and even though I'm not there, I can already hear what it is that you're thinking. I can already hear what it is that you're typing into the chat window. You're going, oh my gosh, that JavaScript is awful. Why in the world would it ever build that? Why? How is that working? How am I supposed to be able to understand what that JavaScript is doing? Guess what? We don't have to understand what that JavaScript is doing. I'll be honest. I don't understand what this JavaScript is doing. Okay, that's not entirely true. I have a rough sense, especially in that block of 4 through 12 is sort of where my loosest rough sense is. But I've got a rough sense of what's going on inside of here. Now, the reason that I don't need to know, and the reason that you don't need to know, and the reason that nobody needs to know exactly what it is that's going on here is because effectively, this is assembly code. This is bytecode. This is missile code. This is, this is the code that our runtime, in our case, Node, is going to be executing for us. We don't have to worry about this. The code just needs to be put together to run as quickly as possible and in a fashion that the runtime can understand. not humans. So if you're looking at that and you're going, I really don't understand what it is that's going on there, that's okay. We don't have to understand what's going on there. That fortunately Node will understand what's going on, and that's really all that matters. Now, I am going to, before I close this window out, I just want to highlight this little spot about a waiter and promises and fulfilled and rejected and all sorts of other things here. I just want to call this out real quick, just as a kind of a mental note here. So just remember this for a couple of minutes. So I'm going to come back to this in just a moment. But for now, I'm going to close that window. It's just going to go away. There. Okay. So let's let's stop and take a step back here. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening. So what's happening is our TypeScript is being converted into JavaScript. What's the magic that's making that happen? Well, part of the magic that's going to make that happen is TypeScript itself. And the other part is the configuration that we have for TypeScript. So the file that I've opened up here is tsconfig.json. And if we take a look at tsconfig.json, what we're going to notice is that we've got a set of compiler options here. Now, there's a few different options that are worth calling out here, but the two main ones are the output directory and the root directory. The root directory is where we're going to look for our TypeScript. And so you'll notice right there, index.ts inside of src, this is our core directory for TypeScript. And then the other thing that you're going to notice is our output directory. This is our lib directory. This is where all of the JavaScript is going to exist. This is now what's going to get executed. So this is basically, hey, where do we get our files from? Hey, where do we send our files to? That's what's going on there. That's what's happening. So our root directory, where we're getting our source code, our output directory, where we're going to send it out to. Now, the couple of other options that, that I want to highlight here real quick is I want to call out the module. The module is, in our case, Commonjs. And what this is indicating is that we're going to effectively be targeting Node development. You could also tell this to target a module loader, which would be if I'm creating something that's going to be running inside of a browser, say like React or otherwise. And if you're really curious, you could go in and investigate a little bit more inside of the docs. The other thing that I want to highlight here is this target. And let me see, are you going to give me IntelliSense? You are. Cool. So this target allows me to choose the version of ECMAScript or JavaScript that I want to emit to. So you'll notice here that if I say ES 2019 as the target, let me just go ahead and save that real quick. And now I'm just going to go ahead and go to my console window here. And I'm just going to do an npm run build and just have it regenerate the JavaScript. Now, if I go back into code here and I open back up my index.js, you're going to notice this is very different. And the reason that this is very different is because we're now targeting a different version of JavaScript. Now, why is that important? Well, the reason that that's important is because this is indicating what JavaScript we want to emit. Again, keep in mind, I write TypeScript, it's the JavaScript that runs. And one big reason that TypeScript exists is because of all the different versions of TypeScript that are out there, or sorry, let me say that again. One of the reasons that TypeScript exists is because of all the different versions of JavaScript and JavaScript engines that are out there. And one thing that can happen is it can keep us from being able to use some new functionality like Async Await, or other cool little features like being able to maybe do classes or object-oriented programming or whatever it is that you might want to be able to do that don't necessarily work depending on the version of JavaScript that you happen to be dealing with. So with TypeScript, I can use the features that I want whenever I want them, and then TypeScript will emit the appropriate JavaScript. Pretty cool. Okay. And if you're more interested about TypeScript, again, I did a presentation on that just the other day. You can go in and check that out. And I do again want to highlight the fact that this is pre-recorded. So if you are this is pre-recorded, despite the fact that I'm leaving in my mistakes. This is in fact pre-recorded. If you do have questions, please feel free to ask them in chat. A couple of my esteemed colleagues are there to interact with, and I also do want to highlight the fact that you can find me on Twitter and ask your questions there. And I apologize again, I'm not able to be there today. Okay, let's now start breaking into some code here. So what I'm going to do is a real quick manipulation here. I'm just going to move, in my case right now, 18 and 19 up into this little spot right here. And there's actually two reasons that I'm doing this. One is to avoid a bug that's going to come up later if I don't do it. But then the other reason is because it just kind of logically then groups all of this together. Okay, so let's start talking a little bit here. So first up, you're going to notice that we've got .env. If you're not already familiar with .env, .env allows you to set up a text file with key value pairs to be environmental variables. This is sort of a good enough, if you will, type of key management, that your security tip for the day is, generally speaking, publishing usernames and passwords to GitHub is a bad idea. Just, generally speaking, just putting it out there, broadcasting your critical information, your secrets into clear text, into a website that everybody can see should probably be avoided. I don't know, maybe that's just me. This is what .env is designed to try and help us out with, that it's sort of a good enough bit of key management, that rather than having to go in and set environmental variables on my own local system and things like that, I can just do all of this inside of .env and then just don't publish .env out into to GitHub. And you'll notice that right here, this is listed on my git ignore. Now, you're going to notice that I keep calling .env kind of a good enough implementation of security. And that really is what it is. It's good enough. It's not perfect, and it's not, and I do want to be clear about this, it's not a high level of security. If these are secrets that could drastically impact your business, .env is probably not going to be what you're going to want to look for. That you'll want to look for something that's going to be able to encrypt this and so forth. And there is tooling that's out there. I've seen extensions of this package that will handle encryption for you. And I'd also highlight the fact that there's this little thing called Azure Key Vault that can also help better manage and secure usernames, passwords, secrets, etc. For you. So you could take a look at those types of things, but again, .env, it's going to be good enough. Okay, so there's .env, there's our little path, and that's just going to give us the ability to go track down that .env file, and this is going to load that up. So in other words, what this is doing is it's grabbing all the values from our .env file and setting them into our environmental variables. So we'll be able to access those by using process.env. and then whatever the name happens to be, just like that. So we'll be able to now just go ahead and start programming from there. Okay. Now what you're going to notice is we're going to load up Restify. For those of you that are not familiar with Restify, Restify is and I'm going to say this and somebody's probably going to get mad at me, and I'm okay. I'm okay with that. If you want to get mad at me for saying this, I'm fine with this. I'll stand by this. Restify is sort of a lighter weight version of Express. Now, the reason that I say this is because Express includes a lot around putting together a full UI. So if I want server-side rendered pages and things like that, Express is really geared towards that. Don't get me wrong, Restify can do some of that, but it's just not built for that. What Restify is really built for is it's really built for setting up REST endpoints. And at the end of the day, our chatbot is actually just going to be a REST endpoint. That's really what this is going to wind up being here. So here, let's actually, I'm gonna use a brand new feature. So I'm using a fantastic little plugin for Draw.io that's available inside of VS Code here. And so here's my ability to start now just dragging and dropping items out onto my screen. Okay, so here's what I want to highlight. So what we're going to do is we're going to create what we're going to refer to as our bot or our chatbot. But in reality, our chatbot isn't actually a chatbot. I mean, it is, but it isn't. It really actually has two components behind the scenes that are going to make the magic happen. The first is going to be a REST endpoint. And this is going to be available at API WAC messages. So everything for our chatbot is actually going to now actually be calling that endpoint. And then our chatbot logic, or what we might actually consider to be our bot, is actually then going to sit behind here. So here's our chatbot. This is what's actually going to be exposed out. More on that in a little bit. All the messages are going to be routed into WAC API WAC messages. And if you remember back to when we opened up our chatbot inside of the emulator, if you remember this, what we did when we opened this up is we pointed it at that localhost 3978 API messages. This is now where all of our messages are going to wind up being routed through. So everything goes to there. And then eventually what we're going to see here is that all of our code is now going to be passed on to the logic of the bot. So that's what's happening here is we're now going to set up that REST endpoint. So we're going to set up our server. We're going to set up a little message here to display out. So in our case, it's going to say server name, listening to, and then whatever our server URL is. To get the bot framework emulator, gives us a link, and then talk to your bot, go to the emulator and hit open bot. So there is that, that initial thing that's being printed out on the screen. Now, the next part here is the bot adapter. Now, the bot adapter exists me see if I can't get a better font color here. There we go. Okay, so in our case, what we've got is we have a bot client. And our bot client is going to be what our user, let me go grab a little user here. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so our little user up here, our user is going to be interacting with our bot client. So when I was using this little emulator here, when I was doing my thing and sending out our little messages and so forth and so on, what I was doing here is I was, come back over here, now interacting with my chatbot. Let me try and say that again. I don't necessarily know that I was as clear as I wanted to be. So I'm the user. I'm interacting with my bot client. What's happening is my bot client is now going to be sending off the messages that are then going to be routed into that endpoint and then eventually into our logic. Well, what eventually needs to happen here is eventually, whoops, let me go back into code. Let me re-explain this one last time. Okay. Sorry for any confusion. Let me try this again. Take whatever take it is. Okay, so I'm the user up here. I was using Bot Framework Emulator. So I'm interacting with my bot client. In my case, again, the emulator. What's happening then is that is then sending messages to our quote unquote chatbot. Well, again, what's our chatbot? It's really just a REST endpoint that eventually is then going to use our bot logic. Now, the catch here is that eventually we need to send messages back out, and we also need to read the messages that have come back in. So there's some additional magic that needs to happen here that I don't necessarily want to worry about. This is actually now where our bot adapter comes into play. Our bot adapter is basically going to act as a go-between here. That it's going to interpret all of the messages that are coming in from the bot, figure out, oh, okay, this is what each one means, and get it ready for me to start to work with. And it's also, in turn, going to allow those messages to flow back out to the other side. So we get a two-way communication here. I think I can turn this into two-way. I probably can. I'm not overly familiar with the tool. This is honestly like my first time using it. So anyway, so my messages are going to go back and forth here. And the other big reason that this exists is because my bot client can actually take a lot of different shapes that we could be using bot client. I could be using, for example, Facebook, or I could be using Teams, or who knows what. And so because of that fact, there's a lot of, there we go. There's a lot of different types of clients that could be communicating here. So we need something that's just going to be able to manage all of this for us. And this is where that bot adapter is going to come into play. So this little bot framework adapter is going to manage all of that for us. Now you are going to notice that it's looking for an app ID and an app password. Don't worry about that for right now. We're going to come back to that in a couple of minutes. Well, in more than a couple of minutes, in a handful of minutes. And I'm going to want to highlight the fact this is pre-recorded. So feel free to ask all the questions you want in the chat window. I've got a couple of my wonderful colleagues. I'm pretty sure Sarah's there, but I'm not exactly sure who else might be there. So say hi to them, ask your questions, and again, you could always find me on Twitter. It does dawn on me I need to update my little. Let's see. We've created the template. There we go. And now we're playing around with the echo bot. Okay. This is where we are. Okay. So, yeah. So there's my little adapter. The next up is my error handler, and this is just globally if something goes wrong, it's going to basically just console write line. You know, just going to print it out. All right. Now we get into the core of of our bot. So what's going to happen is this is going to create a new instance of a little bit of boilerplate code called EchoBot. And I'm going to go in and just open this up real quick. Here's our EchoBot. And I'm going to talk about what's going on in here in just a second. But the crux of this is actually now going to be responsible for handling our user messages and figuring out how to respond and so forth and so on. Now, if I go back again to the diagram, eventually what needs to happen, eventually all of that needs to go out to our little bot over here, or our little bot clients over here. I don't want to have to worry about that. That's, again, where the bot framework adapter comes into play. The bot framework adapter is going to handle all of that for us. So what's going to happen is we're going to, whenever a message comes into our endpoint, we're just going to hand that off to the adapter and let the adapter do its magic. So let's break this down a bit. So you're going to notice that we've got server.post. If you're already familiar with Express, this is going to look very familiar. If you're familiar with Flask, this is going to look pretty similar. In a nutshell, what this is saying, if we're doing a post, so the HTTP method there of post, if we're doing a post and we're posting it to API messages, this is now our code. This is now the code that's going to run. We're going to get the request object, so everything that came up in the JSON body, and we're going to have our response object, how we can communicate back. Now again, I'm not going to do this directly. I'm going to let something else handle this for me. This is, again, that bot framework adapter. Bot framework adapter is going to handle that for us. So our bot framework adapter is going to be managing all of this part right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically just going to hand over the keys. Just give it control. Hey, here's the request object. You can now read everything inside of that JSON payload. Here's the response object. You can now build up the appropriate payload and send it out the door for me. All that I want to do is just figure out what did the user say, and then in turn, figure out what it is that I want to send back out. And we can actually see this. If I bring up my emulator, there we go. And I open up, let's say, this little message right here. This is the message that we got back down. And so we can actually see here's the full JSON object that came down from the bot framework adapter. So it built all of this up for me. I don't have to worry about this. Handles it all. I'm done. Makes my life that much easier. So in turn, that's what I'm going to be doing here is I'm just handing over control. I'm saying here, you do your thing. You do you. Let me focus in on what it is that I need to do. Okay? Well then, what do I need to do? Well, what I need to do and what I need is I need this little context object. Or more specifically, I need this turn context. Let's define some terminology. That pun was terrible even for me. Anyway, let's define some terminology here. So a turn in bot framework terms is a round trip. It's where my user's going to send us something. That something could vary. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. The user's going to send us something, and I want the ability to send something back to the user. That happens in a turn. This turn context gives me access to whatever it is the user sent and gives me the ability to send information back to the user. Now, what we're going to do with this context is we're going to send this out to this little run command, and that's then going to process everything and execute my logic. So the main dialog, or really route to the main logic in our case. All right. The last thing to highlight here is async await. If you're not already familiar with asynchronous programming, this is a really large conversation and a large topic, and I'm going to try and break this down into as short form as I possibly can. One of the challenges that we're going to have here is we're going to be working an awful lot with HTTP, or more specifically HTTPS, and that's of course the protocol that the web is built on. The challenge with HTTP or HTTPS is the fact that it's a slow protocol. It just is. And so sending messages and receiving messages and so forth and so on, all of that just takes time. And if we create a bot that's only able, or if we create a service that's only able to handle one request at a time, or one user at a time, this is obviously going to be problematic. No bueno. So what we need to do instead is we need to do this asynchronously, where basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, if we're actively executing code, stay with me. But if I start a long-running operation, if I try to make a call over HTTPS, that's going to take some time, where we're just going to sit around and we're just going to wait. And we're going to wait. And we're going to wait some more. And while we're sitting here waiting and not doing anything, we could be handling other user requests. And that's exactly what async is all about, or asynchronous programming is all about. It's that ability to be able to go, hey, you know what? This is going to take it a few minutes. I'm just going to put that off to the side, let that kind of percolate and do its own thing. And now I'm going to focus my attention on what's going on over here. You can basically think about this like you're sitting in a meeting. And somebody is talking to somebody else, and they're talking about something that you just don't care about. What do? You break out your smartphone and you start checking Twitter. Come on, we all do it. It's fine. You're asynchronous programming there. So that's what's happening. Now, the exact syntax that we're going to be using here is async await. So what async is going to do is it's going to flag this function as, hey, we're going to have an await inside of here. And what this await is going to do is basically a marker saying, hey, await is basically saying, hey, this might take a while. So I'm going to pause my local execution. So I don't want any additional code to run until the above line executes. But if you have something else to do, go ahead and do it. Now, this is required in Bot Framework. Asynchronous programming is required in Bot Framework. And the reason for that is because this is designed, this is built to be asynchronous, which is exactly what you want. You want this to be scalable. You want this to be asynchronous. So what this means is basically any time at all where we're getting information from the user or we're going to be sending information back down to the user, you're always going to need an await call. If you forget this, what's going to happen is you're going to get some form of a cryptic error message that's going to say something about, something not being disposed or being disposed or blah, 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 so forth and so on. So if you ever run your bot and you get some weird disposed message like that, it's because somewhere along the way you missed an await statement. Now, one big way that you can see whether or not you need to have an await is notice the return type. If the return type ever says promise, make sure that you have an await. If you forget that await, it is going to fail out there. It sort of dawned to me as I'm doing all of this, we really should put together a nice video on asynchronous programming, how all of this works, maybe do demos in Python and in TypeScript. If this is something that you want to see, if you want to see a video talking about asynchronous programming, about Async Await, please say something in the chat. Let us know that this is something that you would want to see, and we can figure out some way to put together a video and put it out for all y'all. Okay. In any event, let's go ahead and keep on going. And I do again want to highlight this is pre-recorded, but do please chat with Sarah and whomever else it is that happens to be in the chat window. Say hi. Okay. Let's turn our attention now to our bot. So up at the very top of our bot, what you're going to notice is we're going to pull in from Bot Builder two little helpers. We're going to pull in Activity Handler and Message Factory. Let's break down Activity Handler first. So Activity Handler, this is a little helper base class. You do not need to use Activity Handler. You don't need to use this. It's there to help make your life a little bit easier. Now, what Activity Handler is going to do is it's going to, sort of as the name implies, help you handle activities. So what's an activity? An activity is the fact that the user has done something, or maybe our chatbot has done something, and we want to be able to execute code in response to that. That's what this is saying. Now, you're going to notice that I'm using a very generic word here of activity. And the reason that I'm using this generic word of activity is because there's actually an awful lot that our chatbot could be sending and an awful lot that we could be doing in response. So for example, one thing that could be happening is we could be typing. So those three little dots? Yeah, that's an activity. So we could actually send that down, or we could actually realize, hey, the user is typing and reply to that. And that's really where Activity Handler comes into play, is because then I could go in and say this and then say on, and now I can see all of the different odds and ends, all the different types, core types of activities that I might want to be able to respond to here and then execute my, my code. Now, the two key events that we're going to have is onMembersAdded and onMessage. So onMembersAdded is going to execute whenever somebody new is added into the chat. So this is your opportunity to greet them. And more importantly, this is your opportunity to let them know what your chatbot can do. There's a very important thing to note about chatbot UX. When I open up a chatbot, let me go back to my emulator here. When I open up a chatbot, you see that little box down there at the very bottom? That's my interface. That's it. That's what I get. And this is very similar, really, to having like a console window. One of the reasons that a lot of users will reject out of hand command line tools is because you need to know what you should be sending to execute something. And that typically requires some level of experience. Developers love this because it allows us to dive straight to whatever it is that we're trying to do. Now, if we just stop right here and all we do is just simply say hello and welcome, like we have in our case, the user's not going to know what it is that they should be doing here. And so as a result, whenever I'm doing my my chatbot, the first thing that I want to do is make sure that my text is nice and clear. So, you know, hi there. I am a basic bot. How are you? And in my case, I'm just going to leave it like this, but you would really want to take this opportunity to describe what it is that your bot can do. Give them examples of the different messages. And really to go one step further here, you'll notice that we can find out what the text is. One big thing that we would always want to make sure of is that we have something that's going to be able to reply to help. That's extremely important here. Because again, if the only thing that my user is ever seeing is just that basic text box there where they can type something and then potentially get something back, they're not going to know exactly what it is they could type in. So I want to be able to say, you know, help. I want to make sure that I'm able to respond to that. And so it all starts right here. It all starts with a really good foundation of having some nice welcome text and being very clear about what it is this bot can do. So I'm a basic bot. I just ask how you are. How are you? So there you go. So now I've been very clear about what it is this bot is going to be doing. This next little bit of code here, you're going to notice that we're going to look through the list of members added. What this is doing for us is it's looking to make sure that we're not responding to ourselves, that the bot being added to the conversation is in fact an event as well. So we just want to make sure that we're not sending this out. So this is basically the who's now joining the conference call. That's basically what this is. So you can see that right there. Cool, cool, cool. So now this is what's controlling what's going to be sent out here. So let me do this. Let me just gonna run my bot here. npm. I think that's, yeah, there we go. Okay, cool. So let me just open up my emulator here. And I'm just going to restart my conversation. And now what you're going to notice is the fact that my text has been updated. So now it says, hi there, I'm a basic bot. I just ask how you are. How are you? All right. Now let's kick back over to our bot and let's start adding in a bit of code to be able to respond back to the user. Now, what you're going to notice is here's our on message. So this is going to tell us, hey, we've got a message back from the user. I'm actually just going to obliterate everything that's in there. So now I've got a message back from the user. Now, what I want to do is I want to go get that message text. And the place where I'm going to go get that is off of the text property. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab that. And now I can start writing my code. So what I could do, for example, is I could go ahead and start with something like this. I could say if message text two lowercase equals help, then I could go ahead and now respond back to that. So I could go ahead and say something like context, send activity, and then message factory text, and I'm going to say help text and help text. Okay, and then let me const help text equals I just ask how you are. How are you? Okay. So let's talk for just a second about what's going on. So what's going on here is I'm now setting up my my little bit of code here to now look to see what it was that the user sent and did they send in help. And if they did, then I'm going to go ahead and send back a little bit of help text here. Now, I'm using a little helper class of message factory here that's going to allow me to set up a text activity. Again, remember, activity, higher level, this is actually what we're going to be sending back and forth. Now, the text activity here is going to give me the ability to set up the text that we're going to display out and the text that we're going to also speak if this did support speech. So now what you're going to notice is it's going to print out that basic help text. Otherwise, and let's just go ahead and set up our basic then echo response. Make my life a little easier. Cool. And then last but not least, now, get yourself into this habit. Whenever you call send activity, always, always, always await. If you fail to do that, then what's going to wind up happening is it's going to give you that funky little disposed message, which is not what we want. Okay. So now let me go ahead and save this. I'm going to come back over to my emulator and I'm going to hit restart. Now, one thing that I want to highlight, I should do this real quick, is behind the scenes, what I had done is I had in my console window, I had executed a little command here called npm run watch. And what this is going to do is it's going to restart my bot every time I hit save. So it just makes my life a little easier here. So npm run watch, every time I hit save, it's going to restart my bot. So now if I come back over to my bot, it says I'm a basic bot, how are you? I say help, and then it gives me now my help message. If I say anything else right now, it's just going to echo back anything else. That's it. Okay. Sip of coffee. And this is going to be a little cut point because again, we're pre-recorded, but please, please, please do ask questions. So a little cut point and then and we're back. Well, I'm back. You were still here. So yeah, just had to throw in a real quick little cut point. Let's keep on keeping on here with our little chatbot. So what you're going to notice is we've set up our bot now to be able to respond to help and to handle, at this point, any other type of message. And it really is from these humble beginnings that we can build our chatbot empire, as it were. That this is really the crux of doing bot development. That we're going to get a message from the user, we're going to interpret that message, we're going to figure out what to do in response to that, and then we're going to send that response then back to the user. So the next question then becomes, well, what can we do with it? And the answer is really anything. That we could go ahead and maybe send this off to a search service, and that might be, say, like Elasticsearch or Azure Search, or some other internal component that you might have for your particular workspace corporation. We could send this off for natural language processing. That there's a little utility known as Lewis that we could use for interpreting what it is the user is saying and try to figure that out. Or we could go ahead and send this off, in my case, to text analytics. And that's what I'm going to demo here. Now, I want to mention, again, the fact that we do not have to actually incorporate any form of AI or otherwise when we're building out our chatbot. That we really could just be building a menu-driven chatbot that works just fine. We could just be sending it off to any other external service. And that really is kind of that's the big point that I want to make today, is we don't need AI. We don't need speech. We don't need natural language processing to have a successful chatbot. That the successful chatbot is going to meet the user where they're at. So this could be in Slack, Teams, Facebook, wherever it is. And it's going to be an intuitive interface for the user to find the information that they're looking for. And this could be done with buttons. This could be done with basic commands, or it could be fancier. It could incorporate natural language processing. It doesn't have to, but it could. It could incorporate something like text analytics to find out how the user is doing, or get a sense of of what it is that they're saying to us. It could, but it doesn't have to. So do keep that in mind, that it does not need to have any of these services. So when I'm doing text analytics here, what I'm really just trying to demo more than anything else is the fact that we can incorporate an external service. That's really what I'm doing here. Now, yes, I'm doing this because it will give us a little bit of a way to display something out about the user and how it is that they happen to be feeling. But again, we don't need to actually do that. That it could just be like a button-driven bot or otherwise. Okay. In any event, let's go ahead and take a look at text analytics. Text analytics is part of Azure Cognitive Services. And the big thing about Azure Cognitive Services is that it's a set of pre-baked APIs that use machine learning models behind the scenes to run through very common ML tasks. So in my case, we're going to be using text analytics, which can then in turn analyze things like sentiment and so forth, give us a bit of information about what it is that the user happened to say here. You are going to notice that there's actually a REST endpoint. We'll bring this up, that we could go ahead and use if we so desire, but there's also a full SDK that we could check out here as well. That if I open up the client library, analyze text using the client library, and hit JavaScript, you're going to notice that there's a full set of APIs that are available to us that we can go ahead and use. Okay. But for right now, in order for this to work, I am going to need to have a key for this. So what I'm doing now is I'm inside of the Azure portal. I'm going to go into Cognitive Services and I'm going to hit Create here. And what this is going to do is this is going to set up an Azure Services 1 key for us that, that we'll use for really almost any cognitive service that, that we might want. So I'm going to give this a very creative name of demo. Again, I'm super creative with my naming. And I'm going to set my location here to be, in my case, West US. Now, the reason that I'm going to choose West US here is partly because this is where I'm located, but also because this is where I'm going to put all of my additional services as well. So that's what I'm going to put there. I'm going to choose the only pricing tier that's available to me. If you want to go see full pricing details, you can do that there. And I'm going to set up a new resource group that I'm going to call Bot Demo. Again, very creative in my name. And all of my resources are going to go into there. So I'll go ahead and create this. I'll fix my error here. Demo, of course, is already being used. Bot demo stream. Create. Give that a second. There we go. Now what this is going to do is this is going to set up our a key that we can then use to now access this service. And it's also going to give us an endpoint as well that we're going to be able to call. So just like that, it's been created. I'm going to hit Go to Resource, and this will then give me my endpoint. Let me copy that to my clipboard. And it's also going to set up a key here, and I'm going to go ahead and grab that. Okay, now you're going to notice right here, tells you, hey, don't share this out. Obviously, not a good idea to go ahead and share that out. And that's again where a tool like .env comes into play. So let me go into my .env file, and I'm going to set up two little items, cog svcs endpoint equals, and let's paste in the endpoint, and then cog svcs key, and then let's paste in that, that key. Now, typically you wouldn't want to do this on a broadcast like I'm doing here, but by the time that you watch this, this service is already going to be gone. The key isn't going to do you any good anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now, if we go back to the docs here, what we're going to notice on the docs is that it walks us through everything that we're going to need here. And so I'm going to make my life a little easier here. I'm just going to go ahead and do a copy, and let's just do it this way. Going to yeah, actually I'll do it that way. Okay, let me copy that. And then let me open up my console. Okay, and I'm gonna just stop my bot. Yes, and then let's paste out my install command. Okay. So what this is doing is this is grabbing the SDK that we're going to use. There we go. And now I'm ready to incorporate that. So let me come back over here to my bot, and I'm going to set up an import statement. And one thing that I really love about TypeScript is I can use this little code snippet. So I'm going to say import, and then I'm just going to hit tab, and then it's going to ask me for the module that I want. So the one that I want is this Azure Text Analytics. Whoops, make sure I'm on code. There we go, back in code. So my little import. So I'm going to grab this from my text analytics, and then what I'm going to want is I'm going to want the client, and then I want the Azure key credential. So this client, as you might suspect, is going to give me access to the text analytics client. This key credential is going to now allow me to go grab the key here. This is giving me a little bit of an issue about having that out of order. Yeah, whatever. Okay. Boy, you're just going to complain here. There we go. Okay, and then what's your problem? Okay. Should be single quotes. Sorry, I'm just cleaning up the little linting issues that TypeScript is giving me. Okay, that looks better. So just a little cleanup just to make the TypeScript linter a little bit happier here. So now let me go ahead and set up my my client here. So I'm going to say const text analytics client equals new text analytics client. And so what this is going to want is it's going to want that endpoint URL, which I can now just go grab by saying process env and then cog svcs endpoint. And then it's going to want my key credential. So I'll say new Azure key credential, and then again process env and then cog svcs key. I think that's what I called it. I'm just going to go double check here. I have a great memory. It's just really short. Yep, that looks good. Okay, so that's going to be my client. So that's now what I'm going to be using to call out to text analytics. So if I scroll on down here, now what I'm going to be able to do is to see, hey, if they didn't ask for help, let's find out how the user's doing. So let's go ahead and get rid of that little bit of code, and let's start from scratch. So I'm going to say const documents equals, and I'm going to put my message text inside of an array. And this is necessary for the client. One big thing about making REST calls of any variety, regardless of how it is that you're doing it, and when I'm using my my REST endpoint, this is exactly what's happening, is that I'm going to be making a REST call. We should always be chunky, not chatty, that we should always try and bundle up as much as possible and send everything up in one shot. And so that's what this is going to allow me to do, is if I had multiple paragraphs, I could just clump them all together, send them all up to the client in one shot, and get the response back then, in turn, in one shot. So it's just a little optimization that we need to be aware of. Now I'm going to say const response equals await, and now I'm going to use that client from before dot, and now you're going to notice, and this is the great part, is that I get my my IntelliSense here, is it's going to say, hey, detect language, or extract key phrases, or in my case, analyze sentiment. So I'll say analyze sentiment, and then this is going to ask me for that array. So I'll send in my documents just like that. Now, this is going to give me back potentially multiple responses. So I really just want the first one. So I'm just going to say const sentiment equals response, and then we'll just use the first one here. Boop, there we go. And now this sentiment is going to give me back that result. So if I say sentiment dot, right now, unfortunately, it only shows me on the IntelliSense the error or an ID. It does actually give me back more information than that. So what I'm going to do, and this is a little TypeScript thing. So TypeScript wants to know the types at all times, which is typically wonderful. But unfortunately, every now and then, it's not going to give me back the right data type, which it's actually not doing here. So what I need to do is I need to actually convert this into, I'm going to just rename that. Response item. What I need to do is I need to convert this into any, which is basically just saying, hey, TypeScript, just trust me. I know what I'm talking about. That I know that there is a sentiment property here. I know this. You're just going to have to trust me. I know that it doesn't look this way, but you're just going to have to trust me. It's there. So I'm going to put this inside of a switch statement. So I'm going to say switch response item sentiment, and then I'll say case, and then I'll say positive. So if the response was positive, then we'll just go ahead and say await context send activity, and I'm just going to send down the text. I'm not going to worry about the speech side of it. I'm just going to say wonderful news. And then if, and we'll make sure we put in a break, case, and then we'll say neutral, await, context, send activity, okay then, break. Probably want something a little bit nicer than that, but it'll work. And then finally case negative, and then we'll go ahead and say await context send activity. Sorry to hear that. Okay, and I'm going to close this out by having this always then just close out await context send activity. How are you doing now? Okay. Now, let's break this down here real quick. So what I want to highlight is what I'm doing is I'm grabbing whatever it is that they've sent to me and putting it into an array. And again, that's just to call out to analyze sentiment. I'm now calling an external service. You could call whatever service it is that you want. I'm calling text analytics for sentiment analysis. You could be sending this off to a search engine. You could be sending this off for NLP, whatever it is. It does not matter. And that's the key here. Your chatbot can do whatever it is that you want it to do. If there's an API that you want to call, you can call it. I'm now going to grab the first item that will come back. That's going to give me that first response. I'm now going to figure out what the sentiment is. If it was positive, wonderful news. If it's neutral, okay then. If it's negative, sorry to hear that. And then I'm just going to send back just to kind of keep this in a loop here of just how are you doing now. So we'll just kind of go back to the beginning and go from there. Now the last thing that I want to close off with is a little best practice here, which is to send typing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say context dot send activity, and I'm going to build up an activity here. Oops. Of typing. Okay, so let's talk about what I just did here. So remember this activity. Activity, higher level, is just something. And it's something that a bot can receive. It's something that a bot can understand. And there's a lot of possible activities. And one of them is typing. So you know those three little dots that you would see in a chat client? That is exactly what we've got going on right here. And this is basically the equivalent of having like a spinning globe inside of a browser window. This is basically the bot saying, hey, I'm working on something. Because without doing this for any long-running operation, what's going to happen is the user's going to send a message. And then that's it. And you know that little bit of awkward, uncomfortable, you're like, okay, what happened to Christopher there? That's exactly what your user's going to go through. Is all they're going to get back is just silence, and they're not going to know that the bot that they're talking to is actually doing something behind the scenes. So always, always, always send typing whenever you're going to be doing anything that's going to be long running. In fact, it's not a bad idea at all to just always send typing. Like every time you get a message in, just always send typing back. It's not a bad idea at all to consider doing that, because what's going to happen for most any client is if the chatbot sends typing and then it sends a message, the typing will just simply go away. So there's like no harm whatsoever in just always doing this. So that way, this is always my indication of, hey, we got your message, we're working on it. It's always a good practice to let the user know that, just to acknowledge the fact that, hey, we got your message. Okay, so now let's save this and let's go back to our console window and start up our bot here. Should be able to just do this. That looks good. Let's kick back over to our emulator and let's restart. Asks me how I am. I'm doing great. Hit send. And you may have noticed it was kind of quick there, but you may have noticed there's a couple three little dots. That is that's the typing that was sent down. So that's what it's using to indicate, hey, we're actually working on something. And then you'll notice that it comes back with wonderful news. It comes back with the how are you doing now? And I could say, I'm just okay. And then it comes back and says, okay, then how am I doing now? And then I could go ahead and just, you know, lather, rinse, repeat from here. And again, I'm not so good. You'll notice that little typing. Sorry to hear that. How are you doing now? So it's that little bit of typing, even though I'm not getting much of a delay, is going to help for interactions where things are going to be a little bit slower. So what we've now done here, if I can now get back over here, we've played around with the Echo bot, we've done that, and now we've actually added in some services that we've now added in the ability to talk to sentiment analysis as part of text analytics and get a response back from the user. The last step here is to now deploy this out to Azure. This will close everything out. I do need a real quick break before I do that. So I'm going to take that. All that you're going to notice, though, through magic of bad video editing is a little cut point. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at deployment. I do want to mention one more time, in case you hadn't already figured it out, that we are pre-recorded today, but I do have Sarah and other esteemed people in the chat window. Feel free to go ahead and ask them questions, or again, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, and we'll go from there. Now, we've got our bot. Let's go ahead and take a look at how to deploy this out. And so what we're going to need here, first up, is we're going to need a website to host our bot that, if we remember, Let's come back over here to, where am I going? Here, over to our little code window. That was not what I wanted to do. Give me 1 second. There we go. Okay, so if we come back over here to our code window and we open up this little diagram, remember that the core part of our chatbot is going to be this little website right here. So we are going to need somewhere where we can host out our logic, and that is going to be a website. So let's kick back over to our Azure portal and let's set up a website. So I'm going to do this by just simply clicking on Create Resource. I'm going to go to Web App. And then I'm going to specify a little bit of information. So my resource group is going to be my bot demo. And this is going to be my sentiment bot demo. Is that going to be available? It is. Fantastic. And I'm going to set this up to be, in my case, Node. So we'll do that. Let's make sure that this is in West US. Plunk. And let's go ahead and set up my app service plan. And this is really just going to set up the size of the VM that my bot's going to be hosted in. So I'm just going to hit apply here, and then I'm going to hit review and create. That looks good. And then let's go ahead and hit create. So what this is doing here is this is now setting up two big things. It's setting up, first of all, what's known as my app service plan. And my app service plan is going to determine two very big things. It's going to determine the operating system that this is going to run on, which in my case is going to be Linux. And it's also going to determine the power of the VM and the resources that the VM will have access to with regards to the amount of memory, to the amount of storage, and to the amount of compute time that you're going to get. That in my case, I chose basic, which does limit the amount of compute time that I'm allowed in a given day. But for what I'm going to be doing, it's going to be just fine. So that was like a perfect stall technique. So now this is done. So I'm going to hit my little notification right here. And if I hit go to resource, there is my little website. I'm going to go ahead and copy this URL because I'm going to need that a little bit later. And I'm going to head on over to my deployment center. So my deployment center is going to allow me to control how my code will get into my website. And I can do this by using something like GitHub, which will allow me to pull from a GitHub repository. I could use something like Azure Repos or Azure DevOps. I could use Bitbucket, or I could use local Git. And I really like local Git because it gives me the ability to just like on command push my code up. I think it's perfect for doing demos and this type of development. So I'll set that up and I'll hit continue. It's then going to go, all right, well, now give me an answer to the build provider. So this is basically what's going to run the npm build for me. And so I'm just going to choose Kudu, which is actually the default. Hit OK, and then hit finish. And so now this is going to give me the Git Clone Uri. So this is where I can now push my code out to. And it's also going to give me my deployment credentials so I can see the username, and I can see the password here, which I'm going to go ahead and just copy all of that into my clipboard buffer. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take a look at how we can deploy out our website. So one of the big thing that I want to highlight yet again here is what I'm actually doing is web deployment. I'm not doing any special bot deployment here. That, remember again, my bot is at its core a web app. So I'm currently deploying out a web app. And so I'm going to start this by saying git init. I'm going to say git status, because I always say git status, and make sure that everything looks good there. Make sure I don't have like my node packages or anything like that. It does have my little draw IO there that's listed. I could go ahead and add that into my git ignore. You know what? Let's do that real quick. Let's go into my git ignore and let's say *draw IO, because I don't necessarily need to deploy that out. So do a git status. Okay, that's now gone. Cool. So now let me go ahead and say git add dot git commit m initial commit. And so now I've set up my Git repository, added all of that in, and now I'm going to add in a remote, git remote, add Azure, and then I'm going to paste in that Git URL here. I'm going to say git push Azure master. It's going to ask me for username and password. It's actually doing this in a little sub window here. So I'm just going to get that set up. Give me 1 second. Yeah, this is actually just happening off screen. It's not because I'm trying to hide the password, all I should be, but rather that it's just the way that the dialog is opened. Okay, so I just punched in the username and password, and this is now going to start to do its thing. And what you're going to notice is the fact that it's now going to be doing our full deployment here. And we would also actually see that it's going to do an npm install right here. And that's now actually going to install all the packages and everything else. So this is taking what we've got. It's actually just taking the TypeScript, pushing this out into Azure, and then letting Azure go ahead and do the creation of the JavaScript. Now, while that's taking place in the background here, I want to go back over here to our website and open up the configuration. I do need to tell it where to start. And so I'm going to do that by going into general settings here. And on the start command, I'm going to say node, and then I'll say lib index.js. This is to tell it to start with that index.js file. Now, the last thing that I'm going to need to do, and there's nothing that's going on my console window here. It's just sort of doing its thing there, and that's fine. But the last thing that I need is I need all of these little secure settings set up. So I'm going to need to store the endpoint and the key inside of Azure. And then I'm also going to need to address this app ID and this password. I'm going to come back over here to my diagram. And the last thing that I want to highlight in my diagram, I want to add one last little component here. So everything over here on the right is what I'm controlling. Everything over here on the left, I don't have direct control over. And for right now, I'm just going to get rid of my little connector arrows here, because I need to put something else in the middle. And that something else that I'm going to put in the middle here is the Azure Bot Service. Because what's actually going to happen is my Facebook and my Teams here are actually going to call this. Connect that directly up here. And the Azure Bot Service is then going to connect up to my bot adapter. Let me see if I can't move things around a little bit better here. There we go. So it's going to look a little bit like this. So when I'm using Facebook or Teams or anything like that, That's going to connect up to the Azure bot service, which will then forward my requests on and then down the line from here. So what this means is that I'm going to need to set up that right there. Let me get a better font color here. Just go with black. Perfect. There we go. So I'm going to need to set up this, this bot service right here. And I'm going to need to make sure that my bot service is able to securely communicate with my code over here. So this is going to require a couple of steps. I'm going to need to set up that bot service. I'm going to need to get that app ID and that password that I've been hinting at here for a little while and get all of that registered. How do I do that? I'm so glad that you asked. Back over here to our browser. Okay. So now I'm going to go back home. I'm going to say create resource, and then I'm going to say bot. Now there's two different bot entries inside of here. There's my web app bot and then my bot channels registration. The web app bot is if I wanted Azure to set up everything for me, to create some sample scripts for me and so forth and so on. That's not what I want here. What I want is I want this bot channel registration, aka the bot service. That's what this option is right here. So I'm going to choose that, and I'm going to hit create. And now what this is going to want to know is the handle. So I'll go sentiment bot demo. It's going to want to know my resource group. It's going to want to know my location. It's going to want to know the pricing tier, and it's going to want to know my endpoint. And so my endpoint is going to be that website that I created, whack API, whack messages. Two very important things here. Number one, make sure that you've got that API messages. If you forget that, things are going to fail. Number two has to be HTTPS. Fortunately, Azure Websites supports that out of the box, so we're good to go there. The other thing that I want to highlight is the fact that my location, West US, is going to be the same as all the other services that I'm running. This is a very important thing for performance, that when you're creating multiple resources inside of Azure, we're going to need all of that inside the same location. Okay, I'm going to turn off my application insights, and I'm going to let this automatically set up an app ID and password that I am going to have to go back and grab in a little bit. It's going to take an additional couple of steps to go grab that, but we'll go back and do that here in just a moment. Okay. I know that this is going to take a second. There we go. So now it's saying go to resource. So I'm going to hit go to resource. And then I'm not going to be able to test this yet, but I'm going to go into settings. And then right down here, there's my app ID. That's going to be that Microsoft app ID. And I'm going to need the password. So I'm going to create a password by creating a new client certificate. So I'm going to say new client certificate, demo for my description. Okay, so let me copy that to my clipboard. Just going to make sure that that's copied. And I'm going to go back to my sentiment bot demo, and I'm going to grab that ID right there. Okay, so what I did is I grabbed the app ID and I grabbed the password. And if we remember again, let's go back over here to code. There's the app ID and there's the password. This is now what's going to allow the Azure bot service to securely communicate with my web app. So I'm going to need to set that inside of my website. So let me go back home. Let me open up my website here. And let me go into configuration. And inside of this configuration is my application settings. These are all my process and variables. So I can now say Microsoft app ID and paste in that app ID value. Let's hit OK. I'm going to say new application setting, Microsoft app password, and then we'll paste in the password that I had. There we go. And I'm also going to set up my cognitive services. So cog svcs endpoint, and let's get that pasted in. There we go. And then last one, key. And let me go grab the key for that. Okay. And now let me go ahead and save that and hit continue. Okay. So there's a lot of moving parts that we have here. So let me just take a real quick step back. See what I did there? I took a step back. Anyway, jokes are just for my own entertainment. So let me just take a real quick step back and let's highlight all of the different moving parts that we have here, because there's a few and it can admittedly get a little bit confusing pretty quick. So this is our app service. This is our bot. So let me set my foreground color here. Uh-oh. There we go. That looks a little bit better. Okay, let me just boom, boom. Okay. Okay. So first of all is our app service here. This is our bot logic. This is our website. So this is where all of our code is going to be running. We also have our text analytics. This is the cognitive service that we're using. So that wasn't quite where I wanted you to point to. That's all right. There we go. Our bot logic, our website, needs to talk to that. So in order to do that, it needs to have the ID and the password. So that's what's being set up there. We also need the bot service. And this is the channel registration. And so this is now what's going to, I don't know why you're doing it that way on me. That's fine. Come here. There we go. This needs to talk over here to our little app service. And so this is why the app service needs that password. So it needs a lot of information. It needs the cog services credentials, and it needs the bot service credentials. So that was what we set behind the scenes. So these are all of the different moving parts that need to be set up. So there's our cognitive services, there's our bot services or our channel registration, and then there is our app service, there's our website, there's our logic. And then finally, what's going to happen is we're going to have different clients. So we're going to have, let's say, teams. You know what? Let me do it this way. We're going to have, let's say, teams. Or we're going to have, let's say, Facebook Messenger. Or whatever it is. And all of these are now going to, in turn, be talking to that right there. Give me just 2 seconds here to wire all of this up. Boo, boo, boo. plunk. There we go. Cool. So all of those are going to talk over here to our bot service, and then that's going to forward the code on from there. So there's all of our moving parts. There's our full diagram. There's our full architecture diagram. Okay. So if I come back over here to my browser, we can now actually test our bot. So I'm going to go back home. I'm going to click right here on our bot channel registration. I'm going to go to Test in Web Chat. And now I'm going to send a message. And this is going to take just long enough to make me nervous. Now, you are going to notice it's not going to properly send the initial greeting message. And the reason for this is just because of the fact that it's starting up for the first time here. And so the message about adding somebody in is not going to work right away. Uh-oh. I might have to do a little debugging. Okay. I'm actually going to leave my debugging in here just because I want you to see this. So let me go into my sentiment bot and let me go to diagnose and solve problems. And just going to go into my application logs here. I'm out of coffee. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, okay. Yeah, so apparently when I did my push, it didn't work. Not exactly sure why. Let me do this. Let me just make a real quick change to my code here. Okay. There we go. Okay, so what I did here is I just went in and made a change just so that way I could indicate to Git that, hey, there's a change here, and now I'm just pushing everything back out there. One thing that I would like to highlight here is doing local Git deployment is great when you're just going in and just playing around with things, but there is one great advantage to doing GitHub integration, that if I'm doing GitHub integration, then what I can actually do is choose a particular item and go, hey, just redeploy this, just tell it to rerun it, so that way if something like that does happen where it just doesn't install properly for whatever reason, that I can just have it rerun again so I don't have to go through this little dance that I went through here. So I'm just going to give this a moment here and let this do the deployment. I again want to highlight, ask questions in the chat window. Feel free to go ahead and hit me up on Twitter. And it looks like this is running a little bit better than last time. Yeah, it already looks better. Okay. Yeah, you can actually see everything that's going on behind the scenes. So it's actually, it's running our build command. It's now doing the TSC build and setting all of that up for me. And then, yeah, you'll notice that it's now going to zip everything up from a temporary location, push that into my brand new image. Deployment successful. Cool. All right. Now I'm ready to go. back over here to the browser. So now let's go back to my bot. Let's go ahead and retry here. And again, this is going to take a minute because it's now spinning everything up, and it will take just long enough to make me nervous. And then, drumroll please. There we go. So now what you're noticing is it's just giving me this basic, okay, then ignore the fact that it's telling me send failed. It actually worked. And then it says, okay, then how are you doing now? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit start over. And now we can see the full bot in action here. So hi there, I'm a basic bot. I just ask how you are. How are you? I'm doing great. My demo ran successfully. Hit send, comes back, wonderful news, how am I doing now? And then I could just continue down this path. So that is that final little checkbox there. We've now successfully deployed this out into Azure. So there it all is. Now, I do want to go back to the architecture again real quick, just so you can kind of see this one last time. There's all of our different moving parts. Now, I am going to mention real quick here that there is definitely a lot of moving parts to setting up a chatbot. And this is, you know, sort of by nature. And if you think about kind of a normal application, there's always going to be a lot of different moving parts. That you're going to have your database, you're going to have your external services, you're going to have your website, you're going to have your mobile portion, you're going to have, you know, whatever it is that you're going to have set up. So there's always going to be something like that. And so that's what we're seeing here with our chatbot. So that is how you can set up your chatbot code. That's how you can call an external service, and that's how you can deploy all of this out into Azure. So with that, I do want to thank everybody for tuning in and for watching today. Hopefully you pick something up. Please again, feel free to reach out on Twitter, and I hope to see you all again very soon and actually doing live broadcasts. But until then, thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you all soon.